a lot of time you spend is also thinking about the future of advertising. What kinds of things are you thinking about doing?
The advertising paradigm is going to be less effective tomorrow than it is today. It's going to get more expensive to reach fewer people who want to listen to you less. That's the trend we've been on, and we're going to continue. So I think the future of the website is...
On today's episode, we'll be talking to Stuart Butler. He's Chief Marketing Officer at Visit Myrtle Beach, and he's doing some very exciting things there. Stuart talks a bit about that experience gap, that gap between what people experience and what their expectations are. We're going to talk about personalization and how eventually that's going to need to lead to individualization. And then finally, we're going to get into the world of AI, the importance of AI and the role it's playing in travel research and just research in general as people continue their experiences. We're excited again, as always. Let's get started. Stuart, thank you so much for being on the show today. We're so excited to have you with us.
Yeah, I'm excited for the conversation. Thanks for having me.
One of the reasons I'm so excited about this, I'm someone who started my career in travel from a marketing standpoint, and I know how kind of backwoods, old-fashioned the travel industry can tend to be a lot of times when it comes to marketing, and especially when it comes to the digital space. And I know you're doing some very exciting, very kind of cutting-edge things in the world of travel marketing, never mind the world of destination marketing, which tends to be even more kind of behind the curve. So the things you're doing with Myrtle Beach are super exciting. And I think it's really centered around how you think about marketing. I know you've said that you consider brand to be kind of the sum of all interactions, right? And all the impact those interactions can have. Can you talk about how that philosophy of yours really impacts your view of marketing?
Yeah, and it's more than just the sum of the touch points, but it's the delta between the expectations and the experience. So every one of us has expectations about everything, whether we've interacted with a brand before or not. You know, if we go to a gas station, we have expectations that the bathrooms are clean, you know, and that the service is friendly. And if the product that's providing those services, if it's missing the mark on those expectations, then it erodes our relationship. And so I think the brand is really, and the brand sentiment is the sum total of all of the deltas between all of the touch points. So if you consistently meet or exceed expectations, then eventually people are going to turn fanatical, and then some of the negative things that might happen become less important. But if you start off with negative expectation or negative experiences from the expectations, it's really hard to overcome that. So we really try to look at where are all the touch points between us as a brand and our customer, and how can we just elevate that a little bit or level set the expectations? Because sometimes you can't necessarily control the experience, but you can control the expectations. So that sum accumulation is really whether or not you're going to continue to grow and succeed. And, you know, we still but really value word of mouth. And I think word of mouth, especially in today's age, is going to become more important as a lot of brands get disintermediated from decision-making related to products and services. So yeah, we're really doubling down on this philosophy of how do we elevate every touch point.
It's great that you talk about that because that's such a challenge to do, of getting the experience and expectations to match up. In fact, we talk about that a lot on this pod, right? We talk about what we call this experience gap between what people expect and what they actually gets delivered, and how hard it can be to transverse that whole gap, right? Of that meeting of the minds of marketing, of product, of IT, of these elements that make it so much more challenging in the digital space to be able to bridge that gap than perhaps it is in the more physical world. So when you think about that and you think about trying to meet that gap, you know, travel is unique because you have so many places where you're touching that experience. There's the inspiration to travel. There's the actual booking, research and booking experience. There's the pre-travel experience. There's the during the trip experience. Then there's the post-trip. How you create that sense of nostalgia about the trip. How do you get the person to say, you know, I want to go back. I want to experience that again. How do you think about all those different touch points? How do you kind of map those out on the customer journey and begin to address them all?
Well, firstly, I don't necessarily think of, you know, a lot of people, especially in the travel space, think of the funnel, the conversion funnel, right? And they think a lot about that the awareness, consideration, and the transaction piece. A lot of destinations, especially, they don't think about the consumer after the booking's made. And so what we try to do is treat people as people and think about everyone as being on a journey and maybe multiple journeys. Like I could be planning 2 trips to a destination, one with my buddies, one with my family, right? Or a business trip and a leisure trip. And so every journey, we have to understand all of those touch points. And it's, you sort of did a good job of breaking down the broad strokes, but there's micro moments within each of those. Like with the pre-arrival, that sort of phase between when I've booked and when I arrive, there's a lot of things that can be done there as marketers, right? Not only can we level set expectations, but we can also start to think about what does the second wallet look like? Can we get, like if I'm a hotel, for example, or a destination, can I start to look at, well, someone's already committed the bulk of their finances to the overall stay. So if I start looking at the second wallet, can I convince them to stay one more night with me? Can I say, hey, you're checking out on this day, but the day afterwards, we've got all this cool stuff, and here's the value proposition for you to stay one more night. So I think a lot of travel marketers miss out on that massive opportunity. It's when we're looking at growing our revenue, to me, the easiest way to grow our revenue is through our existing customers. And with a lot of products online, you're selling widgets online, and you have to sell new widgets, new widgets, new widgets every time. With travel, it's like, it's not just a tangible structured widget, because you can expand what the value prop and the value exchange is on every transaction until it's fully consumed, right? So whether that's through upsells of early check-ins or late checkouts, whether that's, telling them more about the amenities that they can purchase while they're there or staying one more night. So we think a lot about that anticipatory phase. And there's a lot of data out there that suggests that people are more excited during that phase than they are on the trip themselves itself. The stress of travel is a real thing. So let's capitalize that. And then the other area we're really looking is on the afterglow, like the post-stay with travel, because not only is the best guest, the best next guest, the current guest in terms of expanding that wallet, but then the next best guest after that is the person that just stayed and having them come back. And then the next best guest after that is their friends and families, their tribe, right? And can they influence it? So that's where the word of mouth comes in. So if I can, as an example, in the post-stay, start to say, well, one, did you have a good time? Let's do a litmus test to see if you had a good time. If you did have a good time, then let's try to leverage that. Let's try to collect insight from you about how and why you had a good time, maybe collect a photo or memory from you. And then how do I use that to now promote to your friends and family? So it's not me telling them to come stay with me. It's me inviting them to tell their friends and families to come stay with me. So we're really looking at it holistically. And I would say 95% of the destinations I speak with aren't even thinking about these other touch points.
It's really great you look at it that way. And it's funny because you are the destination, right? Is Visit Myrtle Beach. You're the thing that people ultimately are looking to experience. But then there's so many aspects of the trip that you influence, but you don't directly control. You don't control the hotel. You don't control the airline. You don't control the rental car, right? All those different things that can happen. How do you manage to say, we want that experience to meet expectations? We want to deliver that end-to-end experience and think about all those nuances that happen pre-travel and post-travel and so forth, but do that and at the same time say, but there's aspects of this we just don't have control over. How do you balance that?
It's a real challenge for any destination, and because we don't control the entire life cycle of the consumer journey. But we think about it two ways. There's what we control what we can control, and we influence what we can influence, right? So we can influence maybe the customer service experience through training and best practices that we promote to our members, but we can also influence the expectations. And so, making sure that if we see that people are promoting a product that's maybe not entirely transparent, like they're claiming to be the luxurious accommodation and they're really an economy accommodation, there's conversations we can have to educate them on the short-term nature of those kind of tactics. And so it's really interesting. I had an anecdote from, this is several years ago now. We had a hotel that had done a really good job trying to gain traction on TripAdvisor, and it gradually moved up from like 30 to 20 to 10, and eventually continued to get great reviews, had a great experience. And it wasn't a luxurious property. It was just a sort of middle of the road affordable property here in Myrtle Beach, and they finally got to #1 on TripAdvisor, and you all of a sudden saw a massive decrease in the reviews, and it wasn't because their experience had changed. It was because expectations had changed. They've gone from being a very good property to quote unquote the best property in Myrtle Beach. And so people just went there with a different expectation. So we had them go back to their website and we updated their profiles on our site too, and to just clarify a few things, so that people, it level setted their expectations. Yes, we're #1 on TripAdvisor. Here's why. You're going to get clean rooms, you're going to get great customer service, but what you're not going to get is that white glove Ritz-Carlton kind of experience.
That makes perfect sense, because having that balance between what you can influence and what you can control really allows you to have a realistic view. And as you mentioned, what a great anecdote to be able to work with your partners and really make sure that contextually you're able to put the experience in a way that people can understand, and again, kind of lessens that gap, right? Makes it a little bit smaller between those expectations and that experience. And that was really a great example. I loved it. It's funny, we've done similar things just in the world of A/B testing, right? Where in the digital experience, we provide more context. And that context, right, really helps people to be able to kind of lower their guard, to develop that trust, to get that sense of security and convenience that they need to be able to progress and move forward and actually make that conversion. So eh, the same principles apply, right? Whether it's the physical world or digital, it's all the same principles, because it's all the same people, and it's about being people centric, as you mentioned from the beginning.
Yeah, people are people and relationships are relationships, and that's what we're doing. Every time we have a touch point, it's an opportunity to either create a tighter tether between you and the other person, or to erode that relationship. And so that's what we're trying to do. It's just to cumulatively continue to build a tighter, closer relationship that hopefully builds loyalty and long lasting. Loyalty and advocacy, I would say, are the two things that we're trying to build with those.
100%. And it's funny, it's a great segue, because I know a lot of what you're thinking about now and trying to do is say, how do we do that better in today and in tomorrow's digital world? And you kind of foresee a world in which the current experience of kind of like, I click on an ad, I go to a website, I go down the booking funnel, I book, that world may very well become obsolete in a few years, and that you're kind of seeing something different kind of happening in the future. Would you mind speaking to that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's inevitable. I think we've all embraced tools that have come out in the last couple of years, namely, generative AI, ChatGPT, things like that. But it's infiltrating more and more aspects of our life, and we're already seeing the stats are pretty phenomenal in terms of how many people for travel, at least using some form of LLM at some point in the journey, right? And I think that's only going to accelerate. I don't think it's going to reduce. And so there has to be a change, right? People's expectations related to how they gather and parse information is changing. I mean, for me, on my day to day, and I'm a focus group of one, but I'm seeing it across the board in my team. I'm seeing it with my wife, who's a preschool director. Like, everyone is beginning to experiment and play with these tools that obviously offer a better value proposition than a website does. And so we're going to be able to have conversations with information, and we're going to be able to be specific about what our needs are versus having to rely on what a brand assumes we're going to want to hear. And so I think we're rapidly going to move away from what a lot of people are trying to create personalization, but they've done it through sort of buckets and groupings of people. I think we're going to be able to move from personalization to individualization, where we can literally say, we know everything about this person. We're collecting all of that in a CDP, and we're going to be able to, using generative AI, bring forward an experience that is catered specifically to them. So I think the future of the website is, it's going to be a sort of amalgamation of the information we're creating as a brand, although I think we're going to have to restructure how we do content. I think it's going to have to be more atomic type content, where we can construct results for people that are tailored to them. I think it's going to be social. I think the influence of third-party narrative and context is going to be really important, because I think people are going to want to know the whys and the whos and hows when they're looking at just vanilla content. And that could be as simple as a review or a testimonial, but it could also be, how does this specific type of person use this specific type of product? Or how does this trusted source perceive this product. I think that context is going to be really critical. And then we've got to have a way for the consumer to interact with the content in a way that they've never had before, because as they get used to chat in the form of, Gemini or ChatGPT or Perplexity, you name them, I think that expectation is going to proliferate into every aspect of their lives. So they're going to want to be able to converse in real time and have a relationship with the brand like they haven't been able to before. And so obviously that's not scalable to do that manually or to have real people doing it. So I think we're going to have to lean further and further into technology. And at some point there's going to be a hybrid of that social website chat that is going to be the experience that people gravitate towards online. And whether that's something we control or whether that's, there's going to be 3 or 4 main providers of that and we're providing data to it, or we have an agent that is talking to their agent, that's a little murky right now. But inevitably, in my opinion, the website is obsolete within 3 to 5 years, or at least it's significantly reduced. We're already seeing reduction in traffic, but I think we're going to see a tremendous reduction in traffic and a reduction in engagement over the next few years.
It's interesting because you're not the first guest that said that and that feels that AI is definitely pushing things in that direction. So that being said, how do you, as a marketing leader at Visit Myrtle Beach, how do you prepare for that change, for that evolution? What kinds of things are you thinking about doing?
Yeah, so I'm the kind of leader that I do 2 things. I sort of have big, bold vision. We call it cathedral thinking, where we try to construct a future that is beneficial to us and the customer. That might be, hey, we want a customer data platform where we can really gather and leverage every touch point of a consumer in a way that benefits the consumer, right? That might be the vision for the future. And so how do we build the foundation today to get that? That's not something a brand can build overnight, right? It's going to take time, in some cases years, or maybe future generations of administration to implement that fully. But if we know what we're trying to accomplish, we can start to build the foundational blocks for that. So that's one thing. So we've got some bold vision on where some of these things are going, including the web experience, the CDP, a media mix, things like that. But then we start to sort of look at the trends that are happening and draw a line from where they're going to where they could potentially go, and then we place bets on those. So we're betting, for example, that the usage of generative AI and LLMs is going to increase, not decrease, over the next 5 years, right? I think that's a pretty safe bet. So we'll put a lot of resources behind that assumption. We might have other assumptions like, okay, we're going to see a blending of social media and the web in short form video getting integrated into our content more is probably likely, but maybe it's not as likely as the other things. So we'll bet on it, but we're not going to put as many resources into it. So that's how we sort of figure it out. We're like, let's do some scenario planning. Let's figure out where we think things are going, and let's start to place bets and hedges on where we think we can end up, but do it with the end goal in mind. Do it with those cathedrals. Like, we don't want to do anything foundational now that is not congruent with our long-term vision and strategy. So we always talk internally about let's challenge the status quo. Let's be obsessed with the customer, and if those are our guiding principles, then I think we're going to be just fine. Especially with the being obsessed with our customer.
That makes complete sense. I mean, and it's funny that you use the analogy of placing a bet, because it's like you're not taking all your chips and putting it on one square, not playing it in one game, right? You're saying, hey, let's put a little bit here, a little bit there. Let's kind of scatter it around, and some of those are going to miss and there'll be losses, but some of them are likely going to hit too, right? And then you'll kind of get an indication of, okay, well, let's bet a little bit more here and see how this kind of plays out. So very much kind of a lean approach to it, right? That really makes sense and gives a nice return.
Yeah, and one of those bets we're placing right now is on the future content. So we believe that it seems to us that the large language models have done a good job of aggregating the general truth about our destination, right? So there's a sort of unified truth about what Myrtle Beach is and what it isn't, and that exists in perpetuity across every LLM out there, and that's been written about a bazillion times. So there's not really a need for us to continue focusing on that kind of content. Where I think we need to begin to focus is how do we differentiate ourselves? How do we provide value to a consumer that the LLMs don't or can't do? And what are our advantages here? We have boots on the ground. We can provide context that LLMs can't have. We can provide perspective, passion from individual people and then we can map that to other individuals that maybe have similar worldviews, right? So we're going to be creating sort of niche truths about Myrtle Beach that only we have and only we control. And then we're going to find ways to disseminate that to the LLMs, but also to on our own ecosystems. But it's important that we still have that ability to communicate directly with the consumer, because if we don't, we'll get completely disintermediated. And then our role as a destination marketing organization becomes fragile because it's hard for us to show the value we're driving to our community.
Right. And the beautiful thing about your model is that you're keeping the human aspect involved, right? The human touch, which I think is important across any industry, but I think travel is one where it ranks very, very high, where you need that human touch, that human aspect of it really kept central to it, because ultimately travel is a human experience. You're going there because you yourself want to experience this destination. So to see that reflected back in those niche truths you spoke about and the people that are able to feed that back to you, I think that develops that greater relationship, right? That greater affinity to Myrtle Beach that they might not get if they're only getting kind of very static LLM information about this other destination that doesn't have that same kind of human-centric approach.
What's interesting though, we're in a sort of a new era where even the human side can be synthesized to a degree. And you can create personas of humans using generative AI yourself to create contextual, relevant, empathetic content that helps a consumer make a decision. So while we're trying to do it as much as we can with real humans, that doesn't scale as well, or it gets more costly. But you can synthesize some of that, right? So you can create, like we just launched a chatbot on our website, visitmyrtlebeach.com, that has 6 virtual personas, and they all have different they're subject matter experts on different aspects of travel, and they have different personalities. So we're sort of leaning into the trope that these aren't real people, but we're also at the same time synthesizing a context that feels real to the consumer. So if you're looking for kid-friendly activities, you can actually interact with a kid avatar. It's a starfish called Kelpie, and he acts and talks like a kid and is enthusiastic about everything like a kid. So you can have these sort of quote unquote human experiences, even though it's still being created with technology. But I think that differentiation is still key, and we got to keep the humanity in it as much as we can.
On the pod, we really focus on the post-click experience, right? We focus on what happens after someone interacts with the advertising, and that's what we've been talking about now. We've been talking about that experience that happens before you book, as you're thinking about traveling, all those different touch points. But it's interesting, in addition to really thinking about the future of those things, a lot of time you spend is also thinking about the future of advertising and kind of being non-traditional in that regard. And I know one of the things you're really looking at is branded entertainment. So really thinking about advertising in a very different way. I'd love it for you to kind of define that for us, the branded entertainment and what you're doing in that respect.
Yeah, so I think if you look traditionally at where people, I'm talking about destination marketing organizations specifically, they spend 80-90% of their dollars on paid media right now. They're doing some owned, they're doing some earned, but they're really majority of the budget's going to paid. And, to me, there's some problems with leaning so heavily on that. One, I think the whole ecosystem potentially could collapse in the next few years as, search traffic, web usage decreases. We're already at a point where the number of media impressions, especially programmatic, are in the trillions. And if you map that out to the number of humans that exist, it comes out to something like every human being on earth would be watching nothing but ads for 6 hours a day. Like there's some fundamental structural problems with how we're doing paid media. A lot of bloat, a lot of wastage, right? And so I think it's not sustainable for that reason, but it's going to get worse, not better. At the same time, we've got the gatekeepers are getting more greedy and trying to charge more. We've got consumers that are increasingly resistant to advertising, both through technology and ad blockers, but also, from a persuasion perspective. We've got privacy restrictions that are coming in that are preventing us from collecting data, retargeting. There's just a myriad of reasons why the advertising paradigm, paid media paradigm is going to be less effective tomorrow than it is today, right? And that's a trend that's continued for it's going to get more expensive to reach fewer people who want to listen to you less. Like that's the trend we've been on, and we're going to continue. So obviously, if you follow that down to the end, it's like, okay, I'm going to be spending infinite money for zero reach, or zero people care. So we've got to make a change. Like we don't have and I'm a big proponent of the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The next best time is today. And so we got to plant our trees today and figure out what it is. I believe that branded entertainment, which is the the it's the incorporation of brand messaging or brand values, brand perceptions into a package that is first and foremost entertainment. It should really be entertainment brand, but that doesn't resonate as much because you have to be entertaining first. And I believe if you can create something that is entertaining, you can create an audience. If you can attract that audience, then you can turn that audience into community. If you can create that community, then you have influence over what people feel, they think, and then ultimately what they do, right? So it's sort of a long-term play to build your 1,000 true fans. How do you build fanatical people that are going to love your brand in a way that they don't even realize that's what you're doing, right? And so what we've done at Visit Myrtle Beach is we've tried to find mediums and stories that are going to resonate with people. We talk a lot about people, passion, and purpose has to be at the heart of the storytelling. So, we've launched a now Emmy-nominated Peacock series called Traveling the Spectrum, which showcased families with kiddos on the autism spectrum that take a family vacation. Happens to be set in Myrtle Beach, but at no point is it promoting Myrtle Beach, right? The promotion happens organically as people watch and change their perception of Myrtle Beach. So we've launched podcasts, we've launched children's books, we've done a lot. And at no point do we feel like Myrtle Beach is the hero of the story, right? We're the background, we're the backdrop. Sometimes we're the guide, but more often we're just setting good stories in Myrtle Beach and then seeing impact that has. And so just the reach you can get by being entertainment is exponentially higher than through promotion. Like we put out the first trailer for Traveling the Spectrum, and it had over 1 million views within the first couple of weeks for just a trailer, and now the show's on Peacock streaming, and it's Emmy nominated, and it's getting so much, not just views on the owned media side, but it's picking up tons of earned media too. And that storytelling that other journalists are doing, writing about us, creating a show, is now in turn changing the perception of Myrtle Beach as well. So I'm a big believer in this. I think you got to start small and think it's something, especially if you're like us, you have stakeholders that maybe don't understand why you're doing this. You got to really lay the foundation. You got to start with like a 10% of your budget towards it and then gradually ramp it up as it's more effective. But this is, to me, this is the future. Brand collaborations, branded entertainment. I think that's where we're all going to be heading in the next few years.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I love the example of what you're doing there with the show, with Traveling the Spectrum, because, someone could hear this and just think, well, that's just product placement. That's all that is. But that's not really what this is, right? I mean, product placement is, hey, let's do this show and let's make sure the kid is wearing a Myrtle Beach t-shirt and a Myrtle Beach hat every time, he's on camera. And that's not what this is. This is about saying, we want to tell this story. We want people to see this experience because we feel it's important, it's valuable. And how can we as Myrtle Beach support that story, right? How can we provide an environment in which the story can be told? And how can we be sincerely supportive of that? And by nature, without having to put Myrtle Beach in people's face, they're kind of subtly just seeing, oh, okay, this is happening in that place, but you're still educating at the same time. And I think that's really the way it needs to happen, right? There needs to be that air of sincerity to it, and not this thing that's being forced where it's like, okay, every time I see this kid, he's wearing his hat. Because that's not going to resonate with anybody, right?
Right. And you got to play the long game. There were several times throughout the production where we could have made decisions to create situations or showcase situations that would have been great for ratings, as a television show, but maybe wouldn't be in the long-term best interest of either Myrtle Beach, but more the actual show, And so we're definitely, we're trying to do it with the right authentic approach. We're trying not to be opportunistic, to be exploitative, to do things for the wrong reasons. If we do our job right, the byproduct is more people will visit Myrtle Beach, right? But that should never be our primary objective on some of this stuff.
No, not at all, not at all. And it's funny because, again, we kind of transitioned from talking about post-click to pre-click. We started talking about advertising, but in a sense, what you're doing does a lot of what the post-click experience does, and that you're helping inform, you're helping provide this information, you're helping people understand the experience better to be able to make a more informed decision in the long run. So you're really accomplishing those key things by doing it this way.
And it's deeper than that, right? Because I'm a fundamental believer, like just studying neuroscience, we rationalize decisions with thoughts, but we make the decisions with our emotions. And so I think it always starts with, how do you make someone feel about your brand? Like, that's where it begins. If you can make people feel something, you can make someone think it. They're going to rationalize the feeling they have, and then you can make someone do something, right? So it's feelings, thoughts, then action, and it always has to be in that direction. So yeah, the branded entertainment is a really powerful way, especially through storytelling. Stories are probably the most impactful thing in the world at making people feel something. And so whether that's through a podcast or a TV show or whatever it is, a comic book, it doesn't matter. You can impact how people feel about your brand.
So let's kind of level set for the sake of our listeners. So we've really talked about this experience gap and what an extraordinary job you're doing really all along the way of trying to help bridge that gap and connect expectations to actual experiences. As you get a chance now to communicate to other marketers, especially of the travel marketers, but other marketers in general, kind of what's your advice to them in terms of how they can get started with being able to move down this right direction of really trying to bridge that gap and really trying to touch people and have these different experiences along the way?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of travel marketers are afraid to take risks. And I would say right now, the bigger risk, because of the acceleration of change, both consumer behavior change and technological change, I think the biggest risk for you right now as any kind of marketer is to not evolve and adjust. So I think you've got to, one, make sure you're fully immersed in the changes that are happening. Be a power user. Every marketer needs to be an AI power user in their daily, not just in their work, but in their lives, right? And understand where this is going. You have to be at the tip of the spear on this. Every marketer has to be, because this is going to change faster than any technology has ever changed consumers' behavior. And so we've got to be very, very knowledgeable, and then start to draw the lines of what trends you're seeing within your own business and start to say, well, if those continue, what does that mean for us as a business? And how do we begin to place those bets to hedge against some of the negatives, but also take advantage of the opportunities? I think the onset of AI is both the biggest existential threat and the biggest opportunity facing marketers that has ever existed. And so you are in complete control of the future of you and your brand. And the only way to really make sure you have a good chance of being on the right side of that is to fully immerse yourself in it, 100%.
You talked about change and you talked about trends, and it's funny, that need to embrace change is so critically important, and yet it's such a challenge for marketers to grasp the fact that your customers or your potential customers are constantly in flux. They're changing. The market is changing. The world is changing. Your competitors are changing. If you don't have some structure, some framework to say, how are we changing? How are we evolving? How can you possibly expect to keep up? The math doesn't work, right? That just doesn't make sense. So I'm glad you stressed the importance of change and having that proper mentality to start with, and then tracking trends and saying, how do we begin to kind of test and iterate and place those bets on those different trends and see which way the market, which way people are taking us in terms of how, as we as a product or even a travel product, should be moving to kind of keep up with the flow.
And every brand should be engaged 100% with their customer. You can guess a lot of this. You can observe quantitative data, but you need the qualitative information too. Like, if you're not surveying or interfacing with your customer frequently throughout the year, not just a once a year survey or something, but if you're not constantly talking to your customer, talking to the people within your organization that are interfaced with your customer every day, then you really don't know what's happening. And so that's the best intelligence you have to improve, is to listen to your customer. Now, they're not always right, other than in matters of taste, but they're not always right. But you can start to see those trends emerge faster than if you're sitting in a boardroom with your marketing team trying to figure it out on your own.
Stuart, thank you so much for your time. We appreciate it. We appreciate your insights. Excited to hear about how things at Myrtle Beach are going in the direction you're taking them in, and we really wish you well.
Thank you. Appreciate it.